Welcome to Boundless BL. Let me know if you enjoyed the story.
The smell of floor wax and stale coffee had defined every major transition in Shaw's life, always accompanied by the steady, unhurried weight of Kaden Smith beside him. They had met at 5 years old under the plastic primary-colored tables of Oakridge Elementary. Reyes had managed to jam a green crayon up his left nostril. Kaden had used his safety scissors to pry it out with a seriousness that defied his light brown curls and bruised knees. From that afternoon forward, the universe seemed to accept them as a singular unit. Through middle school, where Kaden grew 4 inches in a single summer and Reyes mastered the art of failing geometry with quiet grace, they were inseparable. By high school, their dynamic was an art form. Reyes, sharp-tongued, quick-witted, and endlessly observant, balanced Kaden's steady, grounded, and often infuriatingly calm presence. When Kaden tore his ACL in junior-year varsity soccer, Reyes spent 3 months sleeping on the pull-out couch in Kaden's basement, feeding him ice cream and doing his chemistry homework. When Reyes's mother went through a bitter, drawn-out divorce, Kaden didn't offer empty words. He simply sat on the roof of Reyes's garage with him every night until the sky turned gray, hand resting heavily on the back of Reyes's neck. They never needed anyone else. High school dances were spent in the back of Kaden's battered station wagon, eating gas station nachos and laughing at the awkward formals inside. Dates were non-existent, not out of explicit refusal, but because the concept of adding a third person into the quiet, perfectly sealed vacuum of their life felt redundant. When they applied to college, there was no discussion about separate paths. They submitted their housing forms together, checked the box for requested roommates, and moved into room 402 of the Montclair dormitory at St. Jude's University, as though it were the only logical step in their shared existence. The dorm room was small, but they made it a fortress. Kaden's easel stood in the corner near the window. Reyes's desk was a chaotic mountain of literature majors' textbooks and half-empty mugs. They knew each other's breathing patterns in the dark. Reyes knew Kaden sneezed thrice every morning when the sun hit the blinds. Kaden knew Reyes needed exactly 7 minutes of silence after waking up before anyone could speak to him without getting snapped at. Then came the second semester of their freshman year, and with it, Rina. Rina was an art major in Kaden's advanced oil painting seminar. She was petite, painted her nails in glossy black, and smelled of expensive lavender oil and turpentine. The first time Kaden brought her back to room 402, Reyes was sitting cross-legged on his bed, typing an essay on 19th century poetry. "Ray, this is Rina," Kaden had said, his voice carrying a soft, unfamiliar lilt as he looked at her. "Rina, this is Reyes, my roommate, my best friend." Reyes had offered a polite, clipped smile, his eyes darting to the way Kaden's hand hovered lightly at the small of Rina's back, a gesture Kaden had never used with anyone. It started small. A missed lunch on Tuesday because Kaden was lingering in the studio with her. A movie night pushed back from 8 to 10, then canceled altogether with a quick text. "Hey man, staying at Rina's tonight." "Don't wait up," Reyes told himself. He was being reasonable. It was normal. People dated. College was about expanding horizons. But as weeks stretched into months, the silence in room 402 became deafening. The bed across from Reyes was empty 3 nights out of 7. When Kaden was there, his eyes were glued to his phone, a faint, dopey smile on his lips that made Reyes's stomach twist into sharp, bitter knots. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Thursday in late November. It was Reyes's 19th birthday. Kaden had promised, 3 weeks prior, that they would drive out to the diner on the highway, their traditional spot, to eat lukewarm cherry pie at midnight. Reyes sat on the edge of his bed, wearing the heavy wool sweater Kaden had bought him the year before. Midnight came and went. At 12:43 a.m. the dorm room door unlocked. Kaden walked in, damp from the rain, holding a canvas wrapped in brown paper. "Hey Ray," Kaden said, tossing his jacket over a chair. "Sorry I'm late. Rina's project critique went long and then we went to grab food with her studio group." Reyes stared at him. "It's midnight, Kaden." Kaden paused, looking up, his brow furrowing slightly. Then his eyes widened as realization struck. "Fuck, Ray, the diner." I'm so sorry. I totally lost track of time. You forgot, Reyes said quietly. The sentence wasn't an accusation. It was a plain, heavy fact that settled heavily in the space between them. I didn't forget, Time got away from me, Kaden defended, taking a step forward. Look, we can go tomorrow. I'll clear my afternoon. Don't bother, Reyes snapped, standing up. The anger flared fast and bright, hot enough to burn away the dull ache he'd been carrying for months. Don't do me any fucking favors, Kaden. Are you making such a big deal out of this? Kaden's voice hardened, his own exhaustion flaring up. It's a diner, Ray. We go there all the time. I apologized. I'm allowed to have a life outside of this room. A life. Reyes let out a harsh, breathless laugh. Is that what you call it? You haven't spoken 5 words to me this week that weren't about her or her fucking paintings. You don't live here anymore, Kaden. You just drop off your laundry and leave. Because every time I come back here, you're sitting there looking at me like I committed a crime, Kaden shouted, throwing his hands up. You've been sour ever since I started seeing her. God forbid I date someone, Reyes. What is your problem? My problem is that you threw 18 years in the trash for a girl you met 4 months ago, Reyes roared, his chest heaving. That's not fair and you know it. Kaden stepped directly into Reyes's space, his jaw clenched, his dark eyes snapping with rare fury. You're acting like a jealous ex, the word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Reyes felt as though he'd been struck in the throat. He stared at Kaden, his voice dropping into a dangerous, terrifying quiet. Get out, Reyes whispered. Ray, get out of my face, Kaden. Reyes pulled a roll of thick blue painter's tape from his desk drawer. With swift, aggressive movements, he dropped to his knees and dragged a bold, straight line down the center of the hardwood floor, dividing the room precisely in half, from the doorway past the desks to the window sill. That's your side, Reyes said, his voice shaking with restrained rage as he stood up, pointing at Kaden's bed and easel. This is mine. Keep your shit, your clothes, and your girlfriend on your side. Kaden stared at the blue line, then at Reyes's cold, unyielding face. A terrible, stubborn pride settled over Kaden's expression. Fine, Kaden spat out. If that's how you want it. The Cold War lasted 3 weeks. Room 402 became an Arctic zone. They lived in strict, brutal silence. If Kaden crossed the blue line to get to the door, Reyes didn't look up from his computer. If Reyes was in the bathroom, Kaden left the dorm entirely. Then came Julian. Julian was a senior, a literature major who had been the captain of the debate team when Reyes was a sophomore in high school. He had recently graduated and taken a job at a publishing house 3 blocks off campus. Handsome, articulate, and unmistakably interested, Julian had run into Reyes at the campus coffee shop a week after the fight. When Julian asked him out for dinner, Reyes didn't hesitate. He said yes. He told himself it was time to move on, to build a life outside of Kaden Smith. But deep down, a dark, petty part of him wanted Kaden to feel the exact weight of being replaced. It started small. Julian would drop Reyes off at the dorm after their dates. The first night, Kaden was at his desk, pretending to paint when the door unlocked. Reyes walked in, wearing an oversized beige coat that didn't belong to him. Behind him stood Julian, tall, sharp-jawed, holding a leather messenger bag. Thanks for dinner, Ray, Julian said smoothly, leaning against the doorframe, his thumb casually catching the lapel of Reyes's collar. I'll pick you up around 7 on Saturday. Sounds great, Reyes said, his voice intentionally louder than usual. He smiled up at Julian, a warm, bright smile he hadn't used in weeks. Drive safe. Julian leaned down and pressed a slow, deliberate kiss to Reyes's cheek, his eyes lingering on the room before he turned and left. From across the room, the sound of wood cracking echoed loudly. Reyes turned around. Kaden was standing over his desk, a wooden paintbrush snapped cleanly in half in his fist. His face was pale, his dark eyes wide and fixed on the spot where Julian had just stood. The fuck was that? Kaden's voice was dangerously low, lower than Reyes had ever heard it. Reyes calmly hung his coat on the back of his chair, stepping neatly around the blue tape line. That was Julian, my date. Your date? Kaden stepped right up to the blue line, his knuckles white. Since when do you date men, Reyes? Since when do you date anyone? Since it's none of your goddamn business, Reyes said coolly, pulling his notebook out. Keep to your side of the room, Kaden. He's too old for you, Kaden growled, his chest moving violently. He was touching you like he owned you. I don't like him. I don't care what you like, Reyes retorted, looking him dead in the eye. You have Rina. I have Julian. Isn't this what you wanted, for us to have separate lives? Kaden looked as if he'd been slapped. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He turned around, grabbed his coat, and slammed the door as he stormed out into the cold night. Over the next fortnight, the tension reached a fever pitch. Kaden broke up with Rina. Reyes only found out because he heard Rina crying in the hallway one afternoon, shouting at Kaden that he was emotionally dead and obsessed with his fucking roommate. Kaden hadn't denied it. Instead of fixing things, the breakup made Kaden manic. He stopped going to his late classes. He sat in the room, glaring at the blue tape, watching Reyes like a hawk. Every time Reyes's phone buzzed, Kaden's entire body went taut. Every time Reyes dressed up to meet Julian, Kaden looked ready to tear the building down with his bare hands. The breaking point arrived on a freezing Friday evening. The snow outside St. Jude's University had stopped being romantic around midnight, turning into a bitter, unrelenting blizzard that entombed the Montclair dormitory in a thick cocoon of ice. Inside room 402, the air was suffocatingly heavy, thick with the scent of turpentine, sweat, and the sharp, metallic tang of raw heartbreak. Reyes stood rigid on his side of the floor, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of the oversized wool cardigan Julian had wrapped around his shoulders 2 hours prior. Across the electric blue painter's tape dividing the hardwood like an open wound, Kaden looked like a man unraveling at the seams. His dark curls were wildly disheveled, his jaw shadowed with rough stubble, and his paint-stained fingers were trembling violently against the seam of his jeans. You look ridiculous in his clothes, Kaden spat, his voice a gravelly drag that sounded raspy from hours of silence. Take it off, Ray. Make me, Reyes snapped, his heart hammering a frantic, erratic rhythm against his ribs. You don't own me, Kaden. You don't get to tell me whose sweater I wear, whose car I get into, or whose mouth touches my face. You gave up that right the day you decided I was an inconvenience in your brilliant new life with Rina. I threw her out. Kaden roared, stepping directly onto the blue tape, his heavy boots crushing the adhesive against the floorboards. He closed the distance between them in 2 terrifyingly fast strides, hovering over Reyes like a storm cloud. I broke up with her. She's gone, Ray. She's been gone for 3 days because every time I closed my eyes, every time I touched her, all I could hear was your voice. All I could see was you looking at me like I was a stranger. That's your fault. Reyes yelled back, thrusting a hand against Kaden's chest to keep him at bay. The contact sent a shockwave of heat straight up his arm. Kaden was burning up, radiant warmth rolling off him like an open furnace. You left me behind. For 18 years it was just us. We built everything around each other. And then you met a girl who paints with acrylics and suddenly I'm just the baggage you dragged along to college. I was terrified. Kaden's voice cracked, a sound so raw and ugly it made Reyes flinch. Kaden grabbed Reyes's wrist, pinning his hand flat against his own beating heart. Feel that? That's what you do to me. You've done it since we were kids, Reyes. I took Rina out because I thought if I could just be normal, if I could just lie to myself for 5 minutes, I wouldn't have to face the fact that I am completely, helplessly, disgustingly in love with my best friend. The silence that followed was deafening, swallowed only by the low rumble of the radiator in the corner. Reyes stared at him, his mouth parting slightly, the air evaporating from his lungs. What? I love you, Kaden whispered, the anger draining out of him, leaving behind a hollow, desperate plea. Tears welled in his dark eyes, glittering under the dim yellow glow of the desk lamp. I'm in love with you. I've been in love with you since high school, when you sat on the garage roof with me, when you slept on my floor when my knee was shredded. I wanted to grab you and never let you go, but I was a coward. I thought I'd ruin us, so I tried to find someone else, and all I did was ruin myself. Kaden stepped closer, his body brushing against Reyes's, the heat of him overwhelming. His hand slid from Reyes's wrist up to his throat, thumbs resting gently over the fluttering pulse in Reyes's neck. And then Julian touched you, Kaden growled, his eyes darkening with a sudden, possessive madness that sent a shiver straight to Reyes's core. I saw him kiss your cheek right outside that door, Ray. I sat here on my bed and I wanted to tear him apart. I wanted to drag you inside, lock the door, and scrub his mark off your skin with my own hands." Reyes gasped, a sudden heavy coil of desire twisting tight in his lower stomach. "Kaden, tell me you don't feel it," Kaden pleaded, his face inching closer, his breath hot against Reyes's lips. "Tell me you don't look at me and feel like you're dying too. Tell me to go away, Ray, and I swear to God I'll walk out into that snowstorm and never come back. Just say it." Reyes stared into the eyes he had known his entire life, eyes that had watched him grow up, eyes that knew every secret, every fear, every scar he carried. He reached up, his fingers entangling into the soft, messy curls at the nape of Kaden's neck and stripped away the last 18 years of pretense in a single movement. He pulled Kaden down and kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was an explosion, a violent, long overdue collision of two stars that had been orbiting each other for too long. Kaden let out a wrecked, desperate sound into Reyes's mouth, his arms instantly wrapping around Reyes's waist like steel bands, lifting him slightly off the floor and pulling him flush against his chest. Reyes groaned into the kiss, his hands clawing at Kaden's shoulders, dragging him closer until there was no air, no space, no blue tape left between them. Kaden tasted him deeply, possessively, as if trying to erase every other touch, every other sound, every day they had spent apart. "Ray." "God, Ray," Kaden breathed against his lips, breaking the kiss just enough to trail his mouth down Reyes's jaw, resting his forehead against Reyes's neck as his shoulders shook with raw emotion. Reyes threw his head back, a breathless sound escaping his throat as the reality of them, finally taking hold, sent a shock straight down his spine. "Kaden, the cardigan. I hate it," Kaden growled, gently pushing the heavy wool sweater off Reyes's shoulders, tossing it carelessly across the room where it crumpled in a dark heap on the floor. Kaden's hands immediately settled on Reyes's waist, his large, warm palms firm against him. Reyes shivered as Kaden's touch grounded him, pulling him down onto the bed they had ended up beside. He pushed Reyes down onto the sheets, hovering over him, his dark eyes never leaving Reyes's face. "Look at me," Kaden commanded softly, his chest heaving as he stared down at him. "You are mine, Reyes. You've always been mine. Say it." "Yours," Reyes whispered, his hands sliding up Kaden's arms to lock around his shoulders. "I've never been anyone else's, you idiot." Kaden's mouth met his again, deeper this time, slow and intoxicatingly heavy. In the quiet dimness of the room, the distance between them vanished entirely. Every touch was an unspoken apology, every shared breath a surrender to 18 years of suppressed longing. They moved together with an instinct that was built over a lifetime. No hesitation, no clumsiness, just two halves finally locking back into place where they belonged. The sheer weight of loving each other so intensely transformed into a quiet, consuming fire that swept away every doubt, every bitter memory of the past months. Reyes clung to him, his eyes closing as wave after wave of overwhelming emotion washed over him, anchoring him completely to Kaden's warmth. With a low, breathless sigh, Kaden buried his face in the crook of Reyes's neck, holding him tightly as the tension finally broke between them, leaving them both completely spent and anchored in the quiet dark. He collapsed forward, resting his weight gently against Reyes, their chests heaving together in unison, the room filled only with the sound of their quiet breathing and the soft, steady click of the radiator. For nearly 20 minutes, neither of them moved. Kaden remained wrapped tightly around Reyes, his arms locked around Reyes's torso as though he were trying to fuse them together. He kept his face buried in the crook of Reyes's neck, pressing soft kisses to his skin every few seconds as if to reassure himself that Reyes was still real, still there, still his. Reyes ran his hands through Kaden's damp, dark curls, feeling the slow, heavy beat of Kaden's heart against his own ribs. The blue tape on the floor looked foolish now, a petty, childish line drawn by two people who had been too terrified to admit they shared the same soul. "We need to get up," Reyes whispered softly, though he made no move to push Kaden away. "The dining hall opens in an hour." Kaden shifted slightly, raising his head to look down at Reyes. His eyes were soft, completely stripped of the dark, violent jealousy that had consumed him for weeks. "Let it open. I'm not letting you out of this bed today." Reyes let out a quiet laugh, reaching up to trace the line of Kaden's jaw. We have to, Kaden. Julian's going to be at the holiday brunch. So is Rina. The whole campus is going to be there. Kaden's eyes flashed with a sudden, sharp clarity. He leaned down, pressing his lips firmly against Reyes's in a quick, possessive kiss. Good, good. I want them to see, Kaden said, his voice flat and resolute. He sat up on the edge of the mattress, reaching down to snag the strip of blue painter's tape that still remained near the foot of the bed, ripping it off the floor with a loud, final snap. He crumpled it into a ball and tossed it into the trash. No more sides, Kaden said, looking back over his shoulder at Reyes, a small, brilliant smile tugging at his lips. No more rules, just us. By noon, the blizzard had passed, leaving St. Jude's University buried under a pristine, blinding blanket of fresh snow. The main dining hall was packed to capacity with hundreds of students seeking warmth, hot coffee, and breakfast after being trapped in their dorms all morning. Long wooden tables were crammed with laughter, the chatter of finals week approaching, and the clatter of heavy ceramic mugs. Julian sat near the center table with 3 other seniors from the literature department. A sleek leather binder opened before him as he sipped an espresso. A few tables away, Rina was sitting with her art studio classmates, her eyes dark and ringed with red, moodily picking at a plate of cold toast. The heavy oak doors of the dining commons swung open, letting in a blast of freezing winter air, and 2 figures. Reyes stepped inside, his cheeks flushed pink from the cold, wearing his usual charcoal wool coat. But he wasn't walking alone, and he certainly wasn't keeping his distance. Kaden walked directly beside him, his long stride matching Reyes's perfectly. Kaden wasn't holding Reyes's hand down by their sides where it could be mistaken for a casual gesture. He had his large hand tightly interlaced with Reyes's, their fingers locked together firmly in plain view of the entire room. A sudden, strange hush fell over the surrounding tables as they walked in. Julian looked up from his binder, his eyes dropping immediately to their joined hands. His jaw tightened, a flash of annoyance crossing his sharp features as he stood up slightly from his chair. Reyes, I thought we were meeting later. Kaden didn't even pause. He didn't offer a polite smile or an explanation. As they passed Julian's table, Kaden casually shifted his arm, pulling Reyes close to his side, his thumb stroking the back of Reyes's knuckles in an unmistakable display of absolute ownership. Kaden looked Julian dead in the eye, a cold, dismissive stare that left no room for debate, and kept walking. Rina watched from her table, her fork freezing halfway to her mouth. She stared at Kaden, then at Reyes, taking in the faint mark visible just above the collar of Reyes's shirt, and the proud, radiant tilt of Reyes's head as he walked beside Kaden. She let out a small, bitter breath, finally understanding the wall she had been trying to beat down all semester. Reyes looked up at Kaden as they reached the coffee station at the far end of the hall. Kaden was looking down at him, his dark eyes warm, a triumphant, brilliant smile gracing his features. Reyes didn't say a word. He simply stood on his tiptoes, wrapped his free arm around Kaden's neck, and pulled him down into a slow, deep, lingering kiss right in front of 200 people. Kaden melted into it instantly, his arm wrapping around Reyes's waist, holding him close as the entire dining hall burst into a flurry of shocked whispers and quiet applause from their oldest friends. They had started as 2 kids with crayons under an elementary school table. They had grown through the awkward silence of high school and the painful distance of university. But as Kaden deepened the kiss, holding Reyes against him like he was the only thing keeping the world spinning, one truth remained absolute. They had never needed anyone else, and they never would again.
Thank you for watching the story. Hit that like button and share your thoughts and comments, it means to us. Don't forget to subscribe.